Okay, I think from some of the confused looks I saw that perhaps I didn't do the best job of explaining um, some aspects of object-oriented programming terms and practices. So I'm just going to go through that here today. This might stretch out a bit, but I'm going to do it as point form as I possibly can to try and clarify it. First, a class is not an object. Objects are created from classes. A class is like a blueprint for a house or a template for a document, but it is not the house or document itself. The object is the raw materials to build the house or create the document. The house or the document are created in the code that calls functions or data out of an object. So what's in a class? In order to turn the class into an object, we have to instantiate the class. This is done like this. And you'll see in this line we have $myObjectName equals new a class name, and then a closing delimiter. And here we have instantiated an object from a class called a class name, called the object myObjectName, and we used the keyword new. We have in essence created a copy or an object of the class in memory. So we never actually use the original class itself or call it except to create an object. And up here what we have said is create a new object called myObjectName from a class name. So let's consider some code, and for some strange reason the song Alice's Restaurant is haunting me right now. Maybe it has something to do with circles and arrows into the line in the song that goes 8x10 colored glossies with circles and arrows and a line on it, and a paragraph on the back of each one. So that's for some of us older ones. So we have a class here called MyMath. Within this class we have three class variables or properties called results, which we set to 0, number1, which we have set to 2, and number2, which we have set to 2, and we have labeled them as private. When you make something within a class as private, that means that it cannot be directly accessed or modified from outside the class, or in essence the object which will be built from the class. Within the class we also have two functions or methods. These are called class functions or methods. So we have one called setNumbers, and in this case setNumbers is expecting to be passed two variables which will be numbers. It calls number_1 and number_2. And here what we have done is we have assigned the first variable that this function is passed, called number_1, to our private member variable called number1, and then we've taken the second variable we're passed called number_2 and assigned it to the second private member variable called number2. We have a second function called divide two numbers, and we see that we're not passing anything to it because the brackets are actually empty. And in here what we are doing is taking number1, which contains the variable passed through number_1, dividing it by number2, which contains the contents of the variable called number_2, and then simply sending the results back to the calling routine. Now, our class sits there and does absolutely nothing until we instantiate it, and even then it does nothing more than form an object when we do instantiate it. So when we instantiate it by going create a new object called MyResults from MyMath class. So now what we have done is we have created an object which sits in memory waiting to do something, and class MyMath sits there waiting to be called into, instantiated into another object if needed. So our object is sitting there doing nothing until we come down to this line where there's our little arrow again, where it's saying, to me, I describe it this way: out of my object called MyResults, access the set numbers routine, passing it the variables 10, which will be in $number underscore 2, or $number underscore 1 in the object, and then pass 25.5 into $number 2. So now our original variables, member variables, called number 1 and number 2, instead of containing 2 and 2, now contain 10 and 25.5. Remember, this is in the object, not the class, although the object contains an exact duplicate of this. And now what we do is we print the results of accessing from the object called MyResults the function divide two numbers. And divide two numbers is going to divide 10 by 2.5, 25.5, and spit out the results. I hope that clarified it somewhat. If it still doesn't clarify it, let me know. Now I want to come back to the keyword $this followed by the arrow. $this arrow can be a little bit confusing, and so basically $this, and you'll see this keyword repeated in our class 6 times, simply refers to everything within the class, which of course will be within our object once we instantiate it. And it basically says return the number, access the number 1 from within our class, our object. And the second line is access the number 2 from within this class or object, and so on. So it just basically means access this class, this object, and no other. Now let's expand our knowledge of OOP just a teeny tiny bit. Setters and getters. We've already seen a setter in the code that we just looked at in the previous page. And this should look familiar. It says public function set numbers, $number underscore 1, comma, $number underscore 2. Basically, in its simplest form, a setter sets a value that you pass to it into some variable within our member function, within our member. So number 1 and number 2 in this case are being set. But there's also something called a getter, which is the exact reverse of a setter. You simply retrieve something, a variable, a value, word, whatever, out of your object. In this case, what we're doing here is we have a function called public function get numbers, and all it does is return the number 1 to us, to its calling routine. And you can access this very similar to what we did here, where it says printf answer %2f, etc. You can access the getter in the same way. So I hope that was fairly clear. Now this short video will be followed by a little bit longer video where I will look at the expanded source code for our little project. See you later.